The smell of my burned daughter's teddy bear still clung to my robes when Constance Whitmore walked into my courtroom like she owned it. That same psychotic smile. The one she'd worn while poisoning my dead wife's roses with bleach. The one she'd flashed while stealing $89,000 from our neighbors. The one she'd probably had when she watched my house and everything I had left of my family burn to ash. But this HOA terrorist made one fatal error. She never bothered learning who she was destroying. I'm not just some random single dad she could bully into submission. I'm federal Judge Thaddeus Morrison. And she just committed arson against the one man in this district with the legal power to annihilate her existence. 18 months of psychological warfare. One moment of beautiful reckoning. She thought burning my house would silence me. Instead, she just handed me the match to torch her entire criminal empire. What would you do with this power? Comment your revenge strategy below. But let me back up and tell you how a respected federal prosecutor ended up watching his neighborhood terrorist face federal charges. 2 years ago, life was damn near perfect. I'm Thaddeus Morrison, Thad to friends, 15-year federal prosecutor who'd put away everyone from cartel bosses to corrupt senators. My 12-year-old daughter Zara and I lived in our modest craftsman house in Willowbrook Heights, where the biggest crime was Mrs. Lucy's cat stealing newspapers. The house wasn't much. Faded blue siding, white trim that Sarah had insisted on painting herself while pregnant. But God, it was everything. The morning coffee still tasted better in Sarah's favorite mug. Zara's laugh still echoed from the tire swing I'd hung the day we moved in. Even 3 years after cancer stole my wife, every creaking floorboard held memories I wasn't ready to let go. I was the neighborhood's unofficial good guy. Perfect lawn that made other dads jealous. Helped elderly Mrs. Lucy with groceries every Sunday. The papery feel of her grateful hands always reminding me of my own grandmother. Coached Zara's Little League team. The crack of aluminum bats on Saturday mornings becoming my meditation. Willowbrook Heights was paradise for people like us. Young families, retirees who'd been there since Reagan, single parents just trying to give their kids stability. Block parties where the smell of charcoal and laughter drifted until midnight. Community garden where kids learned that tomatoes didn't grow in grocery stores. The kind of place where neighbors mowed each other's lawns without asking and pretended not to notice when someone left groceries on a struggling family's doorstep. Then, the devil moved in next door. Constance Whitmore arrived 18 months ago in a white Escalade that screamed, "I need everyone to know I have money." Designer everything, blonde hair that cost more than most people's rent, and eyes like a great white shark, dead cold, constantly calculating who to devour next. Her husband worked overseas, oil money, always traveling, which meant Constance had unlimited time to make everyone else's life hell. Within 72 hours, she'd printed business cards calling herself HOA Compliance Coordinator, a title that existed nowhere in our neighborhood's practically non-existent housing agreement. See, Willowbrook Heights technically had an HOA, but it was deader than disco. Formed in 1987, never properly incorporated, hadn't held a meeting since Bush Sr. was in office. We liked it that way. Live and let live, help when needed, mind your own damn business. But Constance saw opportunity like a vulture spots roadkill. She started prowling the neighborhood with a clipboard, that cheap vanilla perfume trailing behind her like toxic waste. Taking photos, measuring lawns, interrogating neighbors about property values and aesthetic standards. The click-clack of her designer heels on concrete became the soundtrack of impending doom. Her first target? My mailbox. Vintage cast iron, hand-painted numbers that Sarah had done during one of her nesting phases. 15 years of Michigan weather had given it character. Some rust, chipped paint, but solid as my marriage vows. It was one of the last things Sarah had touched before Zara was born. Constance declared it non-compliant with neighborhood standards and demanded I replace it within 48 hours or face $50 daily fines. I'm a federal prosecutor. I smell bullshit from 3 counties away. Quick County record search revealed exactly what I suspected. Our HOA had zero legal authority to enforce anything. Better yet, federal employees have specific protections against discriminatory housing enforcement under USC Title 42. HOA harassment of federal employees isn't just annoying. It's a federal civil rights violation punishable by serious jail time. I drafted a polite but firm letter explaining why Constance could take her fake fines and shove them where her fake smile couldn't reach. That letter should have ended everything. Instead, it started a war that would cost me everything I loved and nearly destroy an entire neighborhood. Because I'd just made the fatal mistake of thinking I was dealing with a rational human being. Constance's response to my legal letter arrived exactly 72 hours later, and it wasn't what I expected. She didn't back down. She declared war. At 6 a.m. on a Tuesday, I woke to the sound of my sprinkler system running full blast. Weird since I'd winterized the damn thing weeks ago. I stumbled outside in my bathrobe, coffee steam rising in the cold morning air, expecting a broken valve or maybe some neighborhood kid's prank. What I found was Constance standing in Sarah's memorial rose garden with a spray bottle, systematically murdering every bush my dead wife had planted. "Morning, Thad," she chirped, like committing botanical genocide was as normal as checking the mail. "Just helping with your little pest problem." The chemical smell hit me like a punch to the gut, sharp, acrid industrial strength. Then I saw the label on her spray bottle, herbicide, the kind that could kill a redwood tree, let alone Sarah's delicate climbing roses. "What the hell are you doing?" "Well, since you clearly can't maintain your property to neighborhood standards, I'm solving the bee problem these roses create." That shark smile stretched wider. "We can't have dangerous insects threatening our children, can we?" My hands started trembling, and it wasn't from the October cold. Those roses weren't just plants. They were Sarah's heartbeat still pulsing in our yard. Deep red climbers she'd babied through brutal Michigan winters, talking to them like beloved pets, pruning them with her grandmother's antique scissors. The week before cancer took her, Sarah had gripped my hand with what little strength she had left and made me swear to keep them alive. "There's no bee problem," I managed through clenched teeth. "Oh, but there is. Mrs. Peterson's granddaughter is severely allergic. One sting could kill her." Constance kept spraying, each pump of that bottle like watching Sarah die all over again. "I've documented 17 bee incidents just this month, filed a formal complaint with County Health. Pure fiction. Mrs. Peterson was 87, lived alone and hadn't had visitors in years, but I was learning that truth meant nothing to a sociopath drunk on imaginary power." "Stop. You're trespassing and destroying private property. Leave now or I'm calling police." Constance's laugh could have shattered glass. "Oh, honey, you really don't understand how this works. I'm protecting our community from your negligence." She finished executing Sarah's roses, packed up her chemical warfare kit, and strolled back to her sterile lawn like she'd just delivered homemade cookies to a sick neighbor. That night, watching Sarah's roses curl and blacken in the moonlight, I made my first strategic move in what would become an 18-month war with pure evil. I called in sick and spent the entire next day installing a comprehensive security system. 6 cameras, motion sensors, night vision, cloud backup, every angle covered. Years of prosecuting criminals had taught me that predators like Constance always escalate. And I'd learned from federal cases that residential surveillance laws generally protect homeowners recording anything visible from their own property, especially when documenting ongoing crimes. The investment paid off within 72 hours. 2:47 a.m., my phone buzzed with motion alerts. There was Constance, dressed head to toe in black like some suburban commando, creeping through my backyard with bleach and a stack of official-looking papers. Night vision captured everything in crystal clarity, her pouring industrial bleach directly onto root systems, then carefully placing fake HOA violation notices under decorative rocks. The forged documents were masterpieces of suburban fraud, complete with fake neighbor signatures complaining about safety hazards and property degradation, plus entirely fictional meeting minutes claiming the neighborhood had voted for emergency landscaping enforcement. But Constance made one fatal error. She'd forged Mrs. Lucy's signature. Mrs. Lucy, whose arthritic hands could barely grip a coffee cup. Mrs. Lucy, who couldn't write English beyond her own name. Mrs. Lucy, who'd been warning me for months that our new neighbor radiated very bad energy. I had everything any prosecutor dreams of: video evidence, expert testimony potential, clear criminal intent, trespassing, destruction of property, fraud, forgery. A slam dunk case that should have ended her reign of terror immediately. So the next morning I marched into the police station with my meticulously organized evidence folder and filed formal charges with Sergeant Rick Bellows. That's when I discovered just how far Constance's infection had spread. "Look, Mr. Morrison," Bellows said, sliding my unopened evidence folder back across his desk like it contained anthrax. "Mrs. Whitmore's a pillar of our community. Church volunteer, school fundraiser, always helping neighbors. You sure you're not having some kind of adjustment issues since your wife passed?" The metallic taste of rage flooded my mouth. Adjustment issues? Grief makes people see threats that aren't there. Maybe you should talk to a counselor instead of harassing good people with paranoid conspiracy theories. That's when the horrible truth crystallized. Constance hadn't just targeted my roses, she'd already poisoned the entire system against me. 3 weeks after the Rose Garden massacre, Constance escalated to attacking my family directly. My sister Rebecca had driven 12 hours from Portland for Zara's birthday, the first time she'd visited since Sarah's funeral 3 years ago. Her beat-up Honda Civic looked like it had survived multiple apocalypses, but it ran, and more importantly, it meant Zara got to hear stories about her mom's legendary college pranks. Saturday night, we stayed up until midnight assembling Zara's birthday bike in the garage, the sharp smell of machine oil mixing with Rebecca's lavender perfume while she told stories that made Zara laugh until her sides hurt. Around 1 a.m., Rebecca parked her Civic in my driveway, exactly where every visitor had parked for 5 years. At 6:15 a.m., violent pounding on my door jolted me awake, followed by Zara's terrified screaming, "Daddy, there's a scary truck stealing Aunt Becca's car." I stumbled outside barefoot, pajamas twisted, to find a massive tow truck already winching Rebecca's Honda onto its flatbed. The driver, built like a linebacker with prison tattoos snaking up his forearms, barely glanced up from his paperwork. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" "Vehicle violation, buddy. No overnight guest parking." He shoved a grease-stained receipt at me. $93.50 to get it back. Cash only, no checks. Guest parking violation according to who? That's when Constance emerged from behind the tow truck, like a spider sensing trapped prey, pristine in designer athleisure despite the early hour, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "Morning, Thad. Terribly sorry about the confusion, but community standards must be maintained." She produced a glossy flyer with the flourish of a magician. New overnight guest parking restrictions became effective Friday. Hand-delivered notices to every responsible homeowner. I snatched the flyer, my hands shaking with rage. Professional printing, fake official seals, completely fabricated regulations claiming any vehicle parked overnight without proper residential designation would be removed. The most insane part? Rebecca's ancient Civic was classified as a commercial vehicle because of a small dent near the license plate. This is Rebecca's personal car. She's visiting family. Commercial-grade damage indicates business usage, Constance explained with the condescending patience of a sociopath addressing a mental patient. Plus, extended guest parking creates safety hazards and impacts property valuations for responsible neighbors. The tow truck's diesel engine growled as it prepared to steal my sister's only transportation. I noticed the company logo, Bellows Recovery Services. The metallic taste of recognition flooded my mouth. Bellows. Same name as Sergeant Rick Bellows, the corrupt cop who dismissed my evidence against this monster. "This is criminal harassment," I said, but Constance had already vanished back into her house of horrors, leaving me standing helpless in Superman pajamas while they literally stole my family's property. That afternoon, while Rebecca spent $80 on ride shares to retrieve her car from some industrial hellscape across town, I channeled 15 years of white-collar prosecution experience into investigating this corruption ring. The county clerk's office became my war room. Public records revealed the beautiful, ugly truth about our neighborhood's HOA authority. Willowbrook Heights had been loosely organized in 1987, but the incorporation paperwork was never properly filed. For 35 years, we'd operated on an honor system that worked perfectly because decent people don't abuse imaginary power. Then I discovered the real gold mine. Complaint records from the county courthouse. 47 formal violations filed in 18 months, every single one signed by Constance Whitmore. The pattern was sickeningly clear. She exclusively targeted single parents, elderly residents, and minorities. Anyone who looked vulnerable or unlikely to fight back. Cross-referencing property databases with business licenses revealed the final piece of this criminal puzzle. Bellows Recovery Services wasn't owned by Sergeant Rick Bellows. It belonged to his brother Richard, a career criminal with 2 fraud convictions and a suspended towing license. The conspiracy crystallized like poison in my mind. Constance identifies defenseless targets using fake HOA authority. Brother-in-law cop Rick dismisses all complaints. Other brother-in-law Richard runs the illegal towing operation, a perfect triangle of suburban extortion probably generating thousands monthly in stolen fees. But before I could expose this criminal enterprise, I needed ironclad evidence that would survive their inevitable attempts to destroy me. That evening, I found Zara sitting cross-legged on her bedroom carpet, carefully taping together fragments of a photograph. Sarah teaching 3-year-old Zara to ride her first tricycle. The picture had been in Rebecca's glove compartment. "The mean truck man dropped it when he was being rough," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "It broke into 6 pieces. but I can fix it if I'm really careful. Watching my daughter try to rebuild that shattered memory of her mother, something arctic and predatory settled into my prosecutor's soul. These parasites weren't just stealing money or harassing neighbors. They were breaking apart the last pieces of my family's happiness, one violation at a time. And I was going to destroy them for it. 2 weeks after they stole Rebecca's car, Constance shattered the last line civilized people never cross. She went after my daughter. Tuesday afternoon, I was in federal court destroying a wire fraud defendant when my phone exploded with emergency calls. 12 missed calls in 30 minutes, all from Zara's school. The metallic taste of pure terror flooded my mouth as I listened to increasingly frantic voicemails. Mr. Morrison, Zara's having a panic attack about strangers in your house. Mr. Morrison, she says men with cameras forced their way inside. Mr. Morrison, she's hyperventilating. We need you here immediately. I abandoned my prosecution mid-closing argument and drove 90 through suburban streets, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. Every parent's worst nightmare screaming through my brain. Break-in, assault, kidnapping, the 1,000 ways monsters hurt children. I found Zara in the nurse's office, pale as death, clutching her rescue inhaler while her whole body trembled. She'd inherited Sarah's asthma along with her green eyes, and terror could trigger attacks that landed us in emergency rooms. "Daddy!" She collapsed into my arms, her heart hammering against my chest. "There were bad men in our house. They had cameras, and they wouldn't leave." Principal Watson looked genuinely shaken. "Zara came home for lunch and found 2 men inside your house. They claimed to be conducting some kind of inspection, but when she asked for identification, her voice trailed off. What happened?" They told her little girls shouldn't question adult authority. Then they kept taking pictures while she begged them to stop. The rage that filled my veins felt different this time. Not hot and explosive, but arctic and calculating. These predators had terrorized my child in her own home, and someone was going to pay in blood. Did anyone call police? Of course. Officers said the inspection was legitimate. Anonymous safety complaints requiring immediate investigation. I drove Zara home, her small fingers crushing mine while she recounted every violation of our sanctuary. 2 men with professional cameras, clipboards, fake authority. They'd photographed everything, her bedroom, my home office, even inside our medicine cabinet. The house reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap aftershave, contaminated by strangers who touched our most private spaces. But in their arrogance, they'd left evidence. A business card behind our couch revealed the beautiful truth. Morrison Property Assessments LLC registered just that morning to a vacant lot address. The certified building inspector was actually Derek Whitmore, Constance's unemployed cousin, whose only construction experience involved 3 DUI arrests and a meth possession charge. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She'd created a fake company using my own name to justify terrorizing my daughter. That night, while Zara slept in my bed because she was too traumatized to be alone, I filed an emergency restraining order. 18 months of documented harassment using fake authority to traumatize a child, criminal trespass with fraudulent credentials. Judge Patricia Hernandez, who'd known Sarah, granted it immediately. Constance was forbidden from approaching me, my daughter, or my property for 6 months. Violation meant automatic arrest and federal charges. I felt victorious for exactly 14 hours. Wednesday morning, I woke to voices on my front porch. Through the window, I saw Constance chatting animatedly with 2 police officers, coffee cup in hand like they were discussing weekend barbecue plans. When she spotted me watching, she waved cheerfully and dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Sergeant Rick Bellows looked up from his notepad with the expression of a man watching his pension evaporate. "Mr. Morrison, we've got a situation. Mrs. Whitmore says you threatened her life yesterday, made some pretty specific threats about making her disappear permanently. The audacity literally stole my breath. That's impossible. I was in federal court all day, then at my daughter's school. Dozens of witnesses. Constance's performance deserved an Oscar. Trembling hands, tears on cue, voice breaking with perfect timing. I know grief makes people say terrible things, Thad, but when you told me you'd bury me so deep even God couldn't find the body, I had to protect myself. Check the restraining order I filed yesterday." "About that," Bellows interrupted with the enthusiasm of a man facing his own execution. "Mrs. Whitmore filed a counter-restraining order claiming you've been stalking her, taking pictures, following her to church, threatening her life. Judge signed it 2 hours ago." The legal bear trap snapped shut with surgical precision. 2 conflicting restraining orders, each claiming the other party was the dangerous aggressor. A he-said-she-said clusterfuck that would paralyze the courts for months while Constance continued destroying lives. But this time, her sociopathic cleverness had backfired spectacularly. Because filing false police reports against a federal prosecutor isn't just local corruption. It's a federal crime that carries 20 years in prison. And I was about to show her the difference between small-town bullying and federal justice. That night, while Zara slept fitfully beside me, I made a phone call that would change everything. Marcus, it's Thad Morrison. I need a favor. Marcus Webb had been my law school roommate before becoming the FBI's best financial crimes investigator. We'd stayed close over the years, bonding over bourbon and war stories about white-collar predators who thought they were too clever to get caught. Jesus, Thad, it's midnight. You better be calling because someone's dead. Not yet, but give me time. I explained the situation in prosecutor shorthand. 18 months of escalating harassment, fake HOA authority, criminal trespass, terrorizing my daughter. I need you to run a deep financial background on Constance Whitmore. Something's not adding up about her motivation. You think this is about money? It's always about money, Marcus. Always. 48 hours later, Marcus called back with information that made my blood run cold. Your suburban terrorist is drowning in debt, buddy. We're talking catastrophic financial collapse. The numbers painted a picture of spectacular greed and stupidity. Constance owed $89,000 in back taxes on a rental property she'd bought with fraudulent income documentation. Her husband's overseas oil job had ended 8 months ago. He was actually working at a truck stop in Nevada, sending home barely enough to cover their mortgage. The Escalade was 3 payments from repossession, and she had 17 maxed-out credit cards hidden from her husband. But here's where it gets interesting, Marcus continued. She's been collecting HOA assessment payments from your neighbors for 18 months. We're talking about $340,000 that should have gone into a community fund. My prosecutor instincts started humming like live wires. There is no community fund. Exactly, because there's no legitimate HOA. She's been pocketing every penny while using intimidation to keep people paying. Classic extortion scheme with a suburban twist. The beautiful, horrible picture crystallized. Constance wasn't just a power-hungry sociopath. She was a desperate criminal using fake authority to fund her collapsing lifestyle. Every illegal fine, every fabricated violation, every intimidation tactic was designed to steal money from neighbors too scared or confused to fight back. How many families has she targeted? 23 households paid illegal assessments. Another dozen got hit with violation fines ranging from $50 to $500. She's particularly vicious toward minorities and single parents, anyone who might not understand their rights or have resources to fight. I thought about Mrs. Lucy, who'd mentioned paying neighborhood fees she couldn't afford. Marcus, the young dad who'd seemed nervous whenever Constance appeared. How many families had been quietly terrorized into poverty by this suburban predator? There's more, Marcus said. Federal mail fraud charges are slam dunk. She used postal service to deliver fake HOA notices demanding payment, wire fraud for electronic transfers. And if you can prove she targeted people based on race or family status, civil rights violations under the Fair Housing Act. 20-year federal sentences, Thad. This isn't small-town harassment anymore. This is organized crime with federal jurisdiction written all over it. For the first time in 18 months, I felt the cold satisfaction of a predator about to become prey. Constance had made the fatal mistake that destroys every criminal eventually. She'd gotten greedy enough to commit federal crimes while targeting a federal prosecutor. But I needed ironclad evidence before making my move. One mistake, one procedural error, and she'd walk free while portraying herself as the victim of prosecutorial abuse. I need surveillance, financial records, victim statements. Can you get me a federal task force? For a case this clean? Hell yes. Give me a week to coordinate with the U.S. Attorney's Office. We'll take this bitch down so hard she'll bounce. I hung up feeling something I hadn't experienced since Sarah's death. Hope. Not just for justice, but for the satisfaction of watching a predator realize she'd been hunting the wrong prey all along. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and I was going to enjoy every second of her destruction. The next morning, I called in every favor I'd accumulated in 15 years of federal prosecution. This wasn't just about justice anymore. This was about surgical precision in dismantling a criminal enterprise that had terrorized an entire neighborhood. My first call went to Special Agent Rebecca Torres at the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit. Torres specialized in housing fraud and had a particular hatred for predators who targeted vulnerable families. When I explained Constance's operation, her response was immediate and profane. Federal employees being targeted for housing harassment, mail fraud using fake HOA authority. Jesus Christ, Thad, this is a prosecutor's wet dream. I can have a task force assembled by Thursday. Next, I contacted Sarah Lucy at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Sarah, no relation to my late wife, but equally relentless when pursuing tax evaders, practically purred when I described Constance's unreported income from illegal assessments. $89,000 in undeclared revenue plus tax evasion on rental property? We're talking felony charges with mandatory minimums. I'll have forensic accountants crawling through her finances by Monday. But the most important call went to Maria Santos at the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Maria had spent her career prosecuting housing discrimination cases, and when I outlined Constance's targeting patterns, minorities, single parents, federal employees, her voice turned Arctic. Fair Housing Act violations with a pattern of discriminatory enforcement, that's my specialty. If we can prove systematic targeting based on protected characteristics, we're looking at hate crime enhancements. 25 to life, no parole. While federal agencies mobilized their resources, I turned to the most crucial element, organizing my terrorized neighbors into willing witnesses. That Saturday afternoon, I knocked on Mrs. Lucy's door with a plate of homemade cookies and a proposition that would either save our neighborhood or get us all sued into oblivion. Mrs. Lucy, I need to ask you about the neighborhood fees you've been paying to Constance. Her weathered face immediately filled with worry. I don't want trouble, Mr. Morrison. She said if I don't pay, she'd call immigration on my grandson Tommy. The bastard had been threatening a decorated Marine veteran whose only crime was having Korean grandparents. I spent an hour explaining that Mrs. Lucy had been the victim of systematic extortion, that the fees were completely illegal, and that Tommy's military service gave him more right to be here than Constance's criminal ass. By Sunday evening, I had quietly visited 17 households, documenting a pattern of abuse that made my prosecutor's heart sing with vindictive joy. Young families paying illegal assessments to avoid fabricated violations, elderly residents surrendering life savings to prevent fake legal actions, single mothers working double shifts to afford Constance's phantom fines. Marcus Rodriguez, the nervous young dad I'd noticed avoiding Constance, broke down in tears when I explained his rights. She said if I didn't pay the pool maintenance fee, she'd report me to Child Protective Services for unsafe living conditions. My wife and I have been eating ramen for months to afford her bullshit fees. There was no pool in our neighborhood, never had been. Each story fed the growing case file that would eventually bury Constance so deep she'd need archaeological equipment to see daylight. But documentation wasn't enough. I needed real-time evidence of ongoing crimes. That's when I reached out to Detective Luis Mendoza at the State Police Public Corruption Unit. Mendoza specialized in cases involving dirty cops, and when I mentioned Sergeant Rick Bellows' involvement, his interest became laser-focused. Local cop dismissing legitimate complaints against his brother's business partner? We've been watching Bellows for months. This gives us probable cause for wiretaps and surveillance. Within 72 hours, Mendoza had secured court orders for phone taps on both Bellows brothers and Constance. Hidden cameras went up around the neighborhood, recording every interaction, every threat, every moment of criminal activity. The breakthrough came when forensic accountants discovered Constance's secret weapon, a fake property management company called Willowbrook Community Services. For 18 months, she'd been sending professional invoices for non-existent services, pool maintenance, landscaping, security patrols, community events that never happened. The invoices looked legitimate enough to fool busy homeowners who assumed someone else was handling neighborhood affairs. But the most damning evidence came from her own greed. Text messages between Constance and Derek revealed her entire strategy. Target the single parents and old people first. They're too scared or stupid to fight back. Once we've trained the neighborhood to pay, we can hit everyone else. Digital forensics also uncovered her research on my family. She'd spent hours online learning about Sarah's death, Zara's medical issues, my court schedule, gathering personal ammunition to maximize psychological damage. One particularly chilling browser search read, "How to make federal prosecutor look unstable custody hearing." She hadn't just been harassing us randomly. She'd been conducting psychological warfare with surgical precision, designed to destroy my career and steal my daughter. By Friday morning, we had assembled the kind of case that makes defense attorneys weep. Federal mail fraud, wire fraud, tax evasion, civil rights violations, racketeering, conspiracy, and criminal intimidation. 23 victims willing to testify. 6 months of recorded phone calls, financial records proving systematic theft. The trap was set, baited with 18 months of Constance's own criminal arrogance. Now we just had to wait for her to walk into it. 3 weeks into the federal investigation, Constance must have sensed the walls closing in, because her harassment escalated into something far more dangerous than fake fines and illegal towing. It started with the break-in that wasn't a break-in. I came home from court on a Thursday evening to find my front door slightly ajar, the bitter smell of cigarette smoke drifting from inside. Every prosecutor instinct screamed danger as I pulled Zara behind me and called for backup before entering. The house looked like a hurricane had hit it. Drawers dumped, papers scattered, furniture overturned. But this wasn't a robbery. Nothing valuable was missing. Instead, someone had been searching for something specific, leaving behind a calling card that made my blood freeze. On my kitchen table sat a manila envelope marked "Evidence of Judicial Misconduct," filled with fabricated documents that would have impressed any federal forger. Fake bank statements showing mysterious deposits. Doctored emails suggesting I'd taken bribes in previous cases. Professional quality photographs of me talking to Marcus Webb with captions claiming he was a known criminal informant paying for favorable treatment. The masterpiece was a forged letter on federal courthouse letterhead, allegedly from me to Constance, containing graphic threats that would end my career and land me in prison if anyone believed them. The forgery was good enough to fool casual inspection, letterhead, signature, even the right security paper. But Constance had made two fatal errors. First, the letter was dated for a day when I'd been in Washington, D.C. testifying before Congress, easily verified by C-SPAN footage and hotel records. Second, she'd used phrases no federal prosecutor would ever write, legal terminology that revealed the author's complete ignorance of actual court procedures. More importantly, FBI surveillance had recorded Derek Whitmore breaking into my house while Constance directed the operation from her car, smoking cigarettes and coaching him through a Bluetooth earpiece. "Plant the envelope on the kitchen table where they'll definitely find it," her voice crackled through federal recording equipment. "Make sure you get fingerprints on everything, so it looks like he was trying to hide evidence." The irony was beautiful. While committing federal breaking and entering to frame me for crimes I didn't commit, she was creating ironclad evidence of crimes she actually was committing. But the frame-up attempt was just foreplay for what came next. Friday morning, local news ran a story that made my stomach drop into my shoes. Federal judge under investigation for corruption. Someone had leaked the fabricated evidence to Channel 7, complete with anonymous quotes from concerned neighbors, describing my erratic behavior and suspicious activities. The story was carefully crafted to destroy my reputation without making legally actionable claims. Lots of alleged and under-investigation language that provided just enough cover to avoid defamation charges while maximizing damage to my career. Within hours, my phone was ringing with calls from judicial conduct investigators, federal supervisors, and defense attorneys from every case I'd prosecuted, all smelling blood in the water. The story had enough manufactured credibility to trigger formal investigations that could take years to resolve, even after proving my innocence. But the most devastating call came from Zara's school. "Mr. Morrison, this is Principal Watson. We've received some concerning information about your home situation. Child Protective Services will be conducting a welfare check this afternoon." The final piece of Constance's strategy clicked into place with sickening clarity. Frame me for corruption, trigger CPS investigation, use my criminal behavior to justify removing Zara from my custody. The anonymous tip probably described drug use, violence, neglect, whatever lies would cause maximum damage. When CPS investigator Janet Mills arrived at my door, she looked like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. 20-year veteran with kind eyes, who'd probably seen every imaginable family tragedy, she clearly recognized a setup when she saw one. "Mr. Morrison, I'm required to investigate reports of child endangerment, but between you and me, this complaint reeks of malicious harassment. Anonymous caller claimed you were using drugs, keeping weapons unsecured, allowing dangerous people around your daughter." She spent 30 minutes going through the motions, checking our refrigerator, Zara's bedroom, asking gentle questions that confirmed what she already knew. Our house was clean, Zara was healthy and happy, and the whole investigation was vindictive bullshit designed to hurt a good father. "Whoever called this in wanted to cause maximum disruption to your family," Mills said while completing her paperwork. "I'm closing this case as unfounded, but I have to warn you, they'll probably try again. People who make false CPS reports usually escalate until they get the result they want." That night, while Zara slept soundly despite the day's chaos, I sat in my home office staring at federal surveillance photos of Constance orchestrating my destruction. The images showed her coordinating with Derek, meeting with unknown accomplices, making phone calls that our wiretaps would later reveal contained explicit plans for Phase 3 of her campaign. Phase 3, according to intercepted communications, involved permanent solutions to neighborhood problems. I called Agent Torres immediately. "Rebecca, we need to move up the timeline. She's escalating toward violence. What makes you think that?" "Because desperate criminals with nothing left to lose don't just surrender. They burn everything down and hope to escape in the chaos." "How long do you think we have?" I looked at the surveillance photos again, studying Constance's expression as she directed Derek's criminal activities, the smile of someone who'd crossed every moral line and was preparing to cross the final one. Not long enough. The arson happened on a Tuesday afternoon when desperation finally drove Constance past the point of no return. I was in federal court prosecuting a Medicare fraud case when my phone started buzzing with emergency alerts. The first text message made my world collapse. "House fire at 847 Maple Street. Fire department responding. My house, my home, everything Sarah and I had built together." I abandoned the courtroom mid-cross-examination, leaving my prosecution team scrambling while I broke every traffic law between downtown and Willowbrook Heights. The acrid smell of smoke hit me 3 blocks away, that distinctive chemical stench that meant someone had used accelerant to guarantee maximum destruction. Fire trucks lined our normally quiet street, their red lights painting everything in hellish shades while neighbors gathered in shocked clusters. But the scene that stopped my heart was Zara standing on Mrs. Lucy's front lawn, tears streaming down her soot-stained face as she watched 18 years of memories burn to ash. "Daddy!" She ran into my arms, her whole body shaking. I got home from school and there was already smoke everywhere. Mrs. Lucy made me stay at her house and call 911. Fire Marshal Davidson met me at the police tape, his expression grim as he delivered the news every homeowner dreads. "Started in the basement, spread fast through the first floor. We managed to contain it before it reached the second story, but..." He didn't need to finish. The house was gutted. "Any idea what caused it?" Davidson's 20-year veteran eyes held no illusions about accidental fires. "Accelerant pattern suggests arson. ATF's been called in due to your federal employment status. This gets treated as potential domestic terrorism until proven otherwise." The next 6 hours blurred together in a nightmare of investigators, insurance adjusters, and the slow realization that we'd lost everything that mattered. Photo albums from Zara's childhood, Sarah's jewelry, the hand-painted furniture Sarah had spent months refinishing. Even the rebuilt Memorial Rose Garden was nothing but charred earth and melted metal. But Constance had made her final, fatal mistake. ATF Special Agent Monica Rodriguez arrived with a team of federal arson investigators who treated our home like a crime scene from CSI. Within 2 hours, they'd found clear evidence of professional accelerant placement, timer devices, and most damning of all, security footage from Mrs. Lucy's doorbell camera showing Derek Whitmore entering our house at 1:47 p.m. carrying a suspicious duffel bag. "Your neighbor's cousin isn't the brightest criminal we've seen," Rodriguez explained while showing me enhanced video footage. "Left fingerprints on the accelerant containers, dropped his driver's license in your basement, and was stupid enough to use his own credit card to buy timer devices at Home Depot yesterday." By 8 p.m., Derek was in federal custody, spilling everything to save himself from terrorism charges. The recording of his confession would have been comedy gold if it wasn't describing the destruction of my family's life. Constance said the judge was trying to destroy her with fake investigations, Derek whined to federal agents. She said if we burned his house down, he'd be too busy with insurance companies to keep harassing her. Plus, she promised me $10,000 from the neighborhood fees she'd been collecting. But the most damning evidence came from Constance's own phone, which federal wiretaps had been recording for weeks. Her conversation with Derek 3 hours before the fire was a prosecutor's dream of criminal stupidity. "Make sure you use enough accelerant to destroy everything," her voice crackled through FBI recording equipment. "Target the basement first, then the kitchen where he keeps all his legal files. I want 18 months of his work against me turned to ash. What if someone gets hurt? The kid's at school, he's at court, house should be empty. But even if someone gets hurt, they brought this on themselves by not minding their own business." The casual discussion of potential murder charges was breathtaking in its sociopathic calculation. Constance hadn't just committed arson, she'd done it with complete disregard for human life, which elevated the charges to attempted murder under federal terrorism statutes. Agent Torres arrived at the scene as Derek was being loaded into a federal transport van, his confession complete and devastating. "We've got enough evidence to put both of them away for life," she told me while investigators cataloged the destruction. Arson, conspiracy, terrorism charges against a federal employee. The U.S. attorney is calling this the easiest federal prosecution he's seen in 20 years. But the sweetest moment came at 11:30 p.m., when a convoy of federal vehicles surrounded Constance's house with enough firepower to invade a small country. Through Mrs. Lucy's window, we watched tactical agents arrest the suburban terrorist who'd spent 18 months making our lives hell. She was still wearing her designer pajamas and perfectly applied makeup when they dragged her out in handcuffs. That arrogant smirk finally replaced by the terror of someone realizing their victims had more power than they'd ever imagined. The last thing she saw before being stuffed into a federal transport van was me standing in Mrs. Lucy's yard, holding my daughter close, watching justice finally arrive with badges and arrest warrants. Her reign of terror was over, but her federal prosecution was just beginning. 6 months later, the moment I'd been dreaming about since finding Constance poisoning Sarah's roses finally arrived. United States versus Constance Whitmore and Derek Whitmore, federal court, full media circus. I'd recused myself from the case, obviously, but visiting Judge Patricia Hernandez had no such conflicts. Hernandez was a legend. 20 years on the federal bench, zero tolerance for criminals who targeted families, and a particular hatred for housing discrimination cases that reminded her of her own childhood in segregated Texas. The courthouse steps were packed with news crews from 3 states. HOA Karen federal arson trial had become a national story, the perfect symbol of suburban tyranny meeting federal justice. Local reporters interviewed neighbors who'd suffered under Constance's reign of terror, while national networks explored the broader epidemic of HOA abuse across America. Inside, the courtroom gallery was standing room only. Mrs. Lucy sat in the front row, wearing her best dress and a satisfied smile that could power the building. Marcus Rodriguez held his wife's hand, both of them finally free from the financial terrorism that had nearly destroyed their young family. 23 families whose lives had been shattered by Constance's greed, all waiting to watch justice served with federal precision. But the moment that made 18 months of hell worthwhile came when bailiffs escorted Constance into the courtroom. Orange jumpsuit, shackles, hair unwashed, makeup gone, designer clothes replaced by federal prison attire. The arrogant suburban queen had been reduced to prisoner number 47891, and the transformation was beautiful to behold. She scanned the gallery with desperate eyes, looking for sympathetic faces among the crowd of neighbors she'd terrorized. Instead, she found only victims waiting for vindication and a handful of reporters documenting her downfall. When her gaze finally landed on me sitting in the gallery's second row, her face went white as courthouse marble. For 18 months, she'd seen me as just another target to be broken and discarded. Now she was staring at the federal prosecutor who'd orchestrated her destruction, and the reality of her situation finally penetrated her sociopathic delusions. Federal prosecutor Amanda Walsh had prepared a case that would be studied in law schools for decades. The evidence presentation took 3 days and felt like watching a masterclass in criminal stupidity. Phone recordings of Constance planning crimes, video footage of Derek committing arson, financial records showing systematic theft from 23 families, expert testimony about psychological terrorism and housing discrimination. But the moment that broke Constance's remaining composure came when Prosecutor Walsh played the wiretapped conversation from the day of the arson. "Make sure you use enough accelerant to destroy everything," Constance's recorded voice filled the silent courtroom. "I want 18 months of his work against me turned to ash. What if someone gets hurt? Even if someone gets hurt, they brought this on themselves." The casual discussion of potential murder charges echoed through the courtroom like a death sentence. Jury members visibly recoiled. Gallery observers gasped. Even Constance's overpriced defense attorney looked like he wanted to crawl under his table. When the recording ended, Judge Hernandez's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Mrs. Whitmore, you discussed burning down a family's home with complete disregard for whether a 12-year-old child might be killed. Do you have anything to say about that?" Constance's lawyer frantically whispered in her ear, probably begging her to stay silent. But 18 months of unchecked arrogance had destroyed whatever impulse control she'd once possessed. She stood up, shackles clinking, and delivered the most self-destructive statement in federal court history. "Your Honor, I was protecting our neighborhood from someone who refused to follow community standards. Mr. Morrison thought being a federal employee made him special, made him exempt from rules that apply to everyone else. Someone had to teach him that no one is above accountability." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scratch of reporters' pens capturing every word of Constance's confession. She just admitted to arson, terrorism, and targeting a federal employee specifically because of his government position, federal hate crime territory with mandatory minimum sentences. Judge Hernandez gavelled for order, but her eyes held the cold satisfaction of someone about to deliver justice with surgical precision. Mrs. Whitmore, you just confessed to federal terrorism charges while showing zero remorse for nearly killing a child. Your actions terrorized an entire neighborhood, stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from working families, and culminated in arson that could have murdered innocent people. The sentencing took exactly 3 minutes. Constance Whitmore, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Derek Whitmore, your cooperation earns you 8 years with supervised release. You will both pay full restitution to your victims, totaling $473,000 in stolen fees, property damage, and punitive damages. The gallery exploded in applause. Mrs. Lucy wiped tears from her eyes. Marcus Rodriguez kissed his wife. 23 families who'd lived in terror for 18 months finally watched their tormentor face consequences that matched her crimes. But the sweetest moment came as bailiffs prepared to escort Constance back to federal custody. She turned for one last look at the gallery, searching for sympathy that would never come. Instead, she found me standing with Zara, both of us watching her federal conviction with the satisfaction that only true justice can provide. Her suburban dictatorship was over. Her federal prison sentence was just beginning. 2 years later, the smell of fresh coffee mingles with blooming roses as I sit in our rebuilt kitchen, watching Zara practice her driving in the driveway where this nightmare began. The new house rose from Constance's ashes like a phoenix built of steel and determination. Insurance money, federal victim compensation, and donations from neighbors who'd found their courage created something stronger than what we'd lost. Zara's bedroom overlooks the memorial garden, where Sarah's roses now bloom alongside contributions from every family Constance had terrorized. Mrs. Lucy tends the garden each morning, her weathered hands nurturing beauty where evil once tried to plant fear. The crack of Zara's baseball bat echoes from the backyard where she practices for varsity tryouts, the sound of a teenager who learned that victims can become victors when they refuse to surrender. But our personal healing was just the beginning. Willowbrook Heights transformed into something unprecedented, a neighborhood that actually protects its residents. Our legitimate HOA, formed 6 months after Constance's conviction, operates with bylaws written by constitutional lawyers and transparency that makes corruption impossible. Property values soared 40% as young families specifically sought homes in the community that fought back and won. The $473,000 in recovered stolen fees funded miracles, solar-powered streetlights that make evening walks safe, a state-of-the-art playground where children's laughter replaces the memory of Constance's threats, community workshops where Mrs. Lucy teaches kids that tomatoes grow in soil, not supermarkets. Most importantly, those funds seeded the Willowbrook Heights Justice Fund, which has helped 87 families across the country escape their own HOA nightmares. Marcus Rodriguez, once terrified of Constance's fake authority, now directs our legal education program, teaching families the 3 critical steps that save lives and money. Always demand to see HOA incorporation documents through county records. If they can't produce legitimate legal authority, their power is completely fake, and you can ignore every demand they make. The legal precedents from our case revolutionized housing protection nationwide. Constance's law mandates annual financial audits for all HOAs and criminal background checks for anyone claiming neighborhood authority. Federal guidelines now require FBI investigation whenever federal employees face housing harassment, and our case is studied in law schools as the gold standard for prosecuting suburban terrorism. Constance herself serves as a permanent reminder that actions have consequences. Year 3 of 15 at Federal Correctional Institution Danbury, working prison laundry for 23 cents hourly while her victims thrive in the community she tried to destroy. Recent reports suggest federal custody has taught her that entitled attitudes don't survive contact with hardened criminals who despise child-targeting predators. Derek washes dishes in Oregon, still paying monthly restitution until 2045. Sergeant Rick Bellows lost his pension and freedom, serving 2 years for public corruption. Brother Richard's towing empire was seized and sold, the trucks now serving legitimate businesses instead of preying on desperate families. But the victory that matters most happened last month at our 3rd annual community festival. Zara, now 16 and fierce with Sarah's determination, announced scholarship recipients to a crowd of 600 people, including federal agents, reporters, and families visiting from neighborhoods fighting their own battles. These awards honor kids whose parents never surrendered to bullies, she declared, her voice carrying across faces that had known fear and chosen courage, because the best revenge against people who try to destroy you is building something beautiful where they left ashes. The festival raised $18,000 for next year's Justice Fund, but the real treasure was watching former victims become fierce protectors of vulnerable neighbors. Mrs. Lucy's grandson Tommy, the Marine veteran Constance had threatened with deportation, now leads our neighborhood watch program with military precision and infinite patience. Standing in our garden as sunset painted the roses gold, I felt Sarah's presence in every bloom, every laugh, every moment of peace that evil had tried to steal but couldn't destroy. We didn't just survive Constance Whitmore's reign of terror. We transformed it into something beautiful. Your turn to fight back. Share your HOA horror story in the comments below. You're not alone, and together we can expose these suburban predators. Hit subscribe to HOA Stories for more tales where justice wins and communities heal, because good people really do triumph when they refuse to surrender. The war for your neighborhood starts with one brave family willing to stand up. Make sure that family is yours.
We appreciate you spending your time with us on HOA Stories, where HOA Karens finally get checked. If you enjoyed today's drama, hit like, comment on your favorite part below, and don't forget to subscribe so you'll be the first to catch our next HOA showdown.